The morning Sarah Dalton refused the banker's son was the same morning she discovered she could no longer lift the feed sacks alone, and that realization burned worse than the rejection she had just delivered on her front porch. She stood in the general store in Bentonville, Arkansas, staring at the 100-pound bag of chicken feed with a mixture of fury and desperation, while the shopkeeper pretended not to notice her predicament. It was October of 1876, and she had been a widow for exactly 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days. Not that anyone asked her to keep count, but her heart seemed to mark each moment with stubborn precision. Mrs. Dalton, I could have my boy bring that around later this afternoon, the shopkeeper offered, his voice careful as though speaking to a spooked horse. That will not be necessary, Sarah said, her words clipped and formal. She was 26 years old and had already lived what felt like 3 lifetimes. The first had ended when fever took her parents at 16. The second had ended when a mining accident took her husband Thomas at 24. Now she was living her third life, the one where she ran the small ranch outside town by herself, raised chickens, tended a vegetable garden, and refused every single man who came calling with promises of protection and partnership that always seemed to cost more than they offered. She gripped the corner of the feed sack and pulled. It barely budged. Behind her, she heard the door open and the soft jingle of spurs, but she did not turn around. She would get this feed sack out to her wagon if it killed her, and she would do it without help from any man who would later claim she owed him something for his trouble. "May I help you carry that?" The voice was quiet, almost uncertain, and it came from somewhere just behind her left shoulder. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, as she had refused everything else, but something in the tone made her pause. There was no presumption in it, no expectation. It was simply a question, asked as though her answer actually mattered. She turned and found herself looking at a man she had seen around town, but never really noticed. He was tall, which most men were compared to her 5'3" frame, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore the standard uniform of a working cowboy: worn denim, a faded shirt, scuffed boots, and a hat he had removed upon entering the store. He held the hat in both hands now, his fingers working the brim in what might have been nervousness. "I can manage," Sarah said, but the words came out softer than she intended. "I am certain you can," the man said, and something in his voice suggested he truly believed it. "But it is a heavy load and I am heading out that way regardless. My name is Isaac Foster. I work at the Patterson Ranch, just past your property line." Sarah knew the Patterson Ranch. It was one of the larger spreads in the area, running cattle across several hundred acres. She had seen their hands riding past her fence line but had never paid them much attention. She studied Isaac Foster now, looking for the angle, the expectation, the price that would come with his assistance. "Why?" she asked finally. Isaac blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "Why what, madam? Why do you want to help me?" He considered this for a moment, his fingers still working the hat brim. "Because you need help carrying something heavy, and I am able to carry heavy things. It seems like a straightforward situation." Despite herself, despite 2 years of practicing refusal, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. It was not attraction, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall she had built, a small fissure that let in a beam of light. "1 bag," she said. "Just the feed." "Yes, madam." Isaac set his hat on his head, moved past her, and lifted the feed sack as though it weighed nothing more than a pillow. He waited, looking at her expectantly, and Sarah realized he was waiting for her to lead the way. He was not going to charge ahead, was not going to take control. He was simply going to carry what she could not carry and follow where she led. They walked out to her wagon in silence. The main street of Bentonville was busy for a Saturday morning, full of families doing their weekly shopping, cowboys spending their pay, and the usual collection of townspeople conducting their business. Sarah was aware of eyes following them, of whispers starting up in their wake. By noon, everyone would know that Sarah Dalton had let a man help her, and by evening the speculation would be thick as molasses. Isaac loaded the feed into the back of her wagon with efficient movements, then stepped back, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "Is there anything else?" "No," Sarah said. Then, because her mother had raised her properly despite everything, she added, "Thank you, Mr. Foster." "Isaac," he said. "Just Isaac is fine. Mrs. Dalton," she replied, not ready to offer the same familiarity. He nodded, accepting this, and touched the brim of his hat in farewell. Then he walked away back toward the store, and Sarah stood by her wagon feeling strangely unsettled. She had expected something more. A request for compensation, an invitation to dinner, a heavy-handed suggestion that she might need more help in the future. But Isaac Foster had simply helped her and walked away, as though it truly had been a straightforward situation. The ride back to her ranch took 30 minutes along a road that was more dirt than anything else. Sarah's property was small by local standards, just 40 acres with a house Thomas had built with his own hands, a chicken coop, a small barn, and a well that ran clear and cold even in the hottest months. She had a dozen chickens, a milk cow named Bessie, and a garden that produced enough vegetables to keep her fed with extra to sell in town. She unloaded the feed herself, making 3 trips from the wagon to the coop, refusing to acknowledge that it would have been easier with help. By the time she finished, the sun was high and her back was screaming, but she felt the familiar satisfaction of work completed by her own hands. That night, lying in the bed she had once shared with Thomas, Sarah thought about Isaac Foster's quiet question, "May I help you carry that?" 5 words that had somehow slipped past her defenses when more elaborate offers had failed. She told herself it meant nothing, that she would likely never speak to the man again. But sleep was slow in coming, and her dreams were full of creek water eyes and capable hands. Sunday morning brought church, which Sarah attended primarily because missing service invited more speculation than attending. She sat in her usual pew, third from the back on the left side, and tried to focus on Reverend Mitchell's sermon about charity and Christian duty. But her attention kept drifting to the back of Isaac Foster's head, 6 rows up and across the aisle. He sat alone, she noticed, which was unusual for a ranch hand. Most of the cowboys came to town in groups, attended church in clusters if they attended at all, and generally made their presence known with noise and energy. But Isaac sat quietly, his attention on the reverend, and when the service ended, he filed out with everyone else without stopping to socialize. "Mrs. Dalton." Sarah suppressed a sigh as she recognized the voice. Thomas Brennan, the banker's son, was hurrying toward her with his usual determined expression. He was 28, well-dressed, and absolutely convinced that Sarah simply needed enough persuasion to accept his suit. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I was hoping we might speak," he said, falling into step beside her as she headed toward her wagon. "Perhaps I could call on you this week, Tuesday evening. I am afraid that would not be convenient. Wednesday then, or Thursday, I am quite flexible." "Mr. Brennan." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "I have told you before, I am not accepting callers. But surely you must see the practicality of the situation," Thomas said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made Sarah's teeth clench. "You cannot run that ranch alone indefinitely. You need a man's guidance, his protection. I could provide that, along with financial stability and social standing. What I need, Sarah said slowly, is for people to accept that I am quite capable of making my own decisions about my own life. You are being stubborn. I am being clear. Good day, Mr. Brennan. She left him standing there and headed for her wagon, her hands shaking with suppressed anger. This was the third time she had refused him, and he seemed no closer to accepting her answer than he had been the first time. Behind her, she could hear the whispers starting up again, the endless speculation about the widow who refused to be sensible. Mrs. Dalton. She turned to find Isaac Foster standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands again. Up close in the daylight, she could see that his face was sun-weathered, with small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, though at the moment his expression was serious. "Mr. Foster," she said, trying to calm her breathing. "I could not help but overhear," he said carefully. "Not intentionally, you understand, but voices carry. I wanted to say that I think you are right about making your own decisions." Sarah stared at him. In 2 years, no one had told her she was right about refusing suitors. Everyone had opinions about what she should do, how she should behave, whom she should marry. But this quiet cowboy she barely knew was telling her she was right. "Thank you," she said finally. "I also wanted to ask," Isaac continued, and now he looked distinctly uncomfortable, "if you might need help with anything else. At your ranch, I mean. I am handy with repairs if anything needs fixing." Here it comes, Sarah thought, the real price for Saturday's help. "I could not pay much," she said, her voice cooling. Isaac looked confused. "I was not asking for payment. I was asking if you needed help. Everyone wants something, Mr. Foster." "I suppose that is true," he said slowly. "What I want is to be useful. I have Sundays off, mostly, and some evenings. I like to keep busy. If I could be useful to you, that would be payment enough." Sarah wanted to refuse on principle, but the truth was that her fence line needed mending, her barn door hung crooked, and she had been putting off repairing her porch steps for 6 months. Pride was all well and good, but it would not fix a broken fence. "My fence," she heard herself say. "The north line. Several posts are rotting and need replacing." Isaac's face brightened. "I could look at that. Next Sunday, if that suits you." "Next Sunday," Sarah agreed, wondering what she was doing. The week passed in its usual rhythm. Sarah tended her chickens, worked her garden, made the rounds of the nearby farms selling eggs and vegetables. She avoided town except when necessary, which was how she preferred it. On Wednesday, Thomas Brennan sent a boy with a letter that she burned without reading. On Friday, she saw a group of Patterson Ranch hands riding past her property, and she watched from behind her kitchen curtain to see if Isaac was among them. He was, riding a paint horse with easy confidence, his attention on the trail ahead. Sunday arrived with gray skies threatening rain. Sarah dressed in her work clothes after church, then felt silly and changed into a more presentable dress, then felt even sillier for changing and put the work clothes back on. When Isaac arrived just past noon, carrying a leather tool roll and leading a pack horse loaded with fresh fence posts, she was wearing the work clothes and feeling deeply uncertain about all of it. "Madam," Isaac greeted her, touching his hat brim. "I brought posts and wire. Figured it was easier than making 2 trips. "You did not have to provide materials," Sarah said. "I have money for supplies. These are extras from the Patterson Ranch. Mr. Patterson said I could have them for helping you. He is a good man that way." They walked the fence line together, with Sarah pointing out the problem areas and Isaac examining each post with careful attention. He did not talk much, she noticed, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and precise. He explained what he planned to do, asked her opinion on a few matters, and then got to work with quiet efficiency. Sarah watched for a while, then retreated to her house to prepare noon dinner. It seemed only right to feed the man if he was working, and besides, she had made a large pot of stew the day before. She set the table, put out fresh bread, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that this was the first time she had shared a meal with a man since Thomas died. When she called Isaac in to eat, he washed up at the pump and removed his hat before entering. He waited for her to sit first, said grace when she asked him to, and ate with the focused attention of someone who worked hard for a living. He complimented her cooking, answered her questions about the Patterson Ranch, and did not ask a single personal question. After dinner, he went back to the fence and worked until the threatened rain finally arrived in the late afternoon. By then, he had replaced 6 posts and strung new wire along the entire north section. Sarah stood on her porch and watched him pack up his tools with the rain starting to fall in earnest. "You should wait," she called out, "until the rain passes." Isaac looked up at the darkening sky, then at her porch. "I would not want to impose. It is not an imposition to stand under a roof during a rainstorm, Mr. Foster." He climbed the porch steps and stood as far from her as the space allowed, dripping water onto her boards. The rain came down harder, turning the world gray and blurred beyond the porch edge. In the enclosed space, Sarah was acutely aware of Isaac's presence, of how tall he was, how solid. "Why do you do this?" she asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. "Do what? Help me." Ask nothing in return. Most men would have demanded something by now, compensation or companionship, or at least gratitude that went beyond words. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain. "My mother raised me alone after my father died," he said finally. "I was 8. I watched her struggle with things that would have been easy with help, watched her refuse assistance because she knew what price men would demand. By the time I was old enough to truly help her, she had worked herself into an early grave." His voice was matter of fact, but Sarah heard the old pain underneath. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I learned something from watching her," Isaac continued. "I learned that needing help is not weakness, and offering help should not come with strings attached. I also learned that some people refuse help not because they do not need it, but because they cannot afford the cost. And you want nothing." He turned to look at her then, his creek water eyes serious. "I want you to have a fence that works properly. I want your porch steps fixed before you fall through them. I want you to be able to accept help when you need it without fear of what it will cost you." He paused. "But if I am making you uncomfortable, I will not come back." Sarah felt something crack open wider in her chest, that fissure letting in more light. This man, this quiet cowboy, understood things that no one else had understood. He saw her not as a problem to be solved or a prize to be won, but as a person with legitimate reasons for her walls. "The porch steps," she said. "They are worse than they look." Isaac smiled, and it transformed his face completely. "Next Sunday then." Next Sunday. The rain continued to pour down, and they stood together in comfortable silence until it finally eased to a drizzle. Isaac collected his horses and rode away, and Sarah watched him go with her hand pressed against her chest, feeling the unfamiliar flutter of something she had thought died with Thomas. The next Sunday, Isaac arrived with lumber for the porch steps. The Sunday after that, he fixed her barn door and oiled the hinges. Each visit followed the same pattern. He arrived after church, worked on whatever needed fixing, shared a meal with her, and left without asking for anything beyond permission to return the following week. They talked during those meals, slow, careful conversations that revealed bits and pieces of their lives. Sarah learned that Isaac was 28, that he had worked ranches across 3 territories, before settling at the Patterson spread, that he could read and write and had ambitions of owning his own land someday. He learned that Sarah had loved Thomas, but their marriage had been more practical than passionate, that she missed her parents still, that she took fierce pride in keeping the ranch running despite everyone's predictions of failure. October turned to November, and the town's speculation about Sarah and her mysterious cowboy helper grew more intense. Thomas Brennan stopped by twice more, each time more insistent that Sarah was being foolish. The Patterson ranch wives invited her to tea and asked pointed questions about Isaac's intentions. Even Reverend Mitchell pulled her aside after church to inquire, gently, if she was being wise. Sarah ignored them all. For the first time in 2 years, she did not feel like she was simply surviving. She felt like she might actually be living again. It was a cold Sunday in late November when everything changed. Isaac arrived earlier than usual, looking troubled. Sarah met him at the door, concern immediate. "What is wrong?" "I need to tell you something," Isaac said, not moving from the porch. "And you may not want me to come back after I do." Sarah's heart contracted. Here it comes, she thought. The price? "Tell me." "I have been offered foreman position," he said, "at a ranch up in Missouri. Better pay, better prospects. It is the kind of opportunity I have been working toward for years." "That is wonderful," Sarah said, and meant it, even as something inside her crumbled. "You should accept." "I told them I needed to think about it," Isaac said. "Because leaving would mean not seeing you anymore, and I have realized that the thought of that is worse than staying in a ranch hand position indefinitely." Sarah stared at him. "What are you saying?" Isaac took a deep breath. "I am saying that somewhere between fixing your fence and repairing your porch steps, I fell in love with you. I am saying that I think about you every day I am not here. I am saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I would turn down that foreman position and count myself lucky to spend my Sundays fixing things at your ranch for the rest of my life." The words hung in the cold November air between them. Sarah's mind raced, trying to find the trap, the angle, the price he was demanding. But looking at Isaac's face, at the vulnerability and hope there, she realized there was no trap. He was simply offering her his heart and asking nothing but honesty in return. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," Isaac said gently. Everyone wanted to help after Thomas died. Everyone had suggestions and offers and promises. But what they really wanted was control of my land or my person, or both. I refused them all because accepting help meant giving up my freedom. "I do not want your land," Isaac said. "I do not want to control you. I just want to be near you, to help you when you need it and stand back when you do not. To share meals and conversations and maybe, if you will let me, a life." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. "You should take the foreman position." Isaac's face fell, and Sarah realized he thought she was refusing him. She hurried to continue before he could leave. "You should take it, and I should sell my ranch, and we should go to Missouri together. As husband and wife, if you will have me." The transformation on Isaac's face was like sunrise breaking over mountains. "If I will have you." "I fell in love with you too," Sarah said, the words tumbling out now. "Somewhere between you asking to carry my feed and you understanding why I refused help. I fell in love with your quietness and your kindness and the way you never assumed you knew what was best for me. I fell in love with your patience and your respect and your ability to fix things without making me feel broken. I love you, Isaac Foster, and I want to build a life with you, but not if it means you sacrificing your dreams." Isaac closed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "You are my dream," he said simply. "The foreman position is just a job. You are everything." "Then we will find a way to have both," Sarah said. We will go to Missouri, you will take the position, and I will start fresh somewhere new. Together. Together, Isaac repeated, and then he was kissing her, and Sarah was kissing him back, and 2 years of walls and refusals and careful distance crumbled completely. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Bentonville church. Thomas Brennan attended with a sour expression. The Patterson Ranch hands came in force, whooping and cheering. Reverend Mitchell gave them his blessing with what looked like relief that Sarah was finally being sensible, though Sarah suspected his definition of sensible, and hers were quite different. Sarah sold her ranch to a young couple just starting out, getting a fair price that, combined with her savings, gave her and Isaac a solid financial foundation. They packed up her belongings, said goodbye to the few friends she had in Arkansas, and headed north to Missouri just before Christmas. The ranch where Isaac would serve as foreman was twice the size of the Patterson spread, running cattle and horses across rolling hills that reminded Sarah of ocean waves frozen in grass and stone. The owner, a gruff but fair man named William Carson, had a house on the property specifically for his foreman, a 3-room structure that was weathered but sound. "It needs work," Isaac said apologetically as they stood in the empty front room on their first day. "But the bones are good." "Everything needs work," Sarah said, looking around with satisfaction. "That just means we get to make it ours." They spent the winter transforming the house into a home. Isaac did most of the heavy work, but Sarah insisted on helping where she could, the two of them working side by side in comfortable partnership. She set up a chicken coop like the one she had back in Arkansas, started planning a spring garden, and began learning the rhythms of this new place. The work was hard but satisfying. Isaac was gone most days managing the ranch hands and seeing to the cattle, but he came home every evening to Sarah, and those evenings became the anchor of their lives. They cooked together, talked about their days, made plans for the future. At night, they shared a bed that Sarah had once thought she would never share with anyone again, and the intimacy they built was nothing like her practical marriage to Thomas. This was passion and partnership, desire and deep affection, a physical expression of the emotional connection they had forged. Winter gave way to spring, and Sarah discovered she was pregnant on a warm April morning when the world was coming back to life. She told Isaac that evening on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Missouri hills gold and pink. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy," Isaac laughed. "Sarah, I feel like I have been given the world." Their son was born in January of 1878, arriving during a snowstorm with lusty cries that echoed through the small house. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's first husband, because she wanted to honor the man who had given her the foundation on which she had built her new life. Isaac understood, as she knew he would, and held baby Thomas with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. Motherhood transformed Sarah in unexpected ways. She had always been independent, had always relied on her own strength, but now she learned the vulnerability of love so fierce it terrified her. She watched Isaac with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness in his large hands, the wonder in his eyes. The ranch prospered under Isaac's management. Mr. Carson gave him more responsibility, and with it came better pay and more security. By the time Thomas was 2, they had saved enough to buy their own land, 160 acres adjoining the Carson Ranch. It was raw land, requiring tremendous work to make productive, but it was theirs. They built a house together, bigger than the foreman's cottage, with a proper kitchen and multiple bedrooms and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. They built barns and corrals, planted fields, and started their own cattle herd. Isaac continued working as foreman while building their ranch, and Sarah managed their growing operation with the same fierce determination she had brought to her Arkansas property. In 1880, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with Sarah's dark hair and Isaac's eyes. They named her Mary after Isaac's mother, and Sarah held her while Thomas, now 3, peered at his sister with fascinated suspicion. "Is she going to stay?" he asked. "Forever and always," Sarah told him. The years rolled on, measured in seasons and children and the slow, steady growth of their ranch. Another son came in 1883, named John for Sarah's father. Twin daughters arrived in 1885, surprising everyone and making their household chaotic and loud and full of laughter. Through it all, Isaac remained exactly who he had been that day in the general store, quiet, kind, steady as stone. He was the kind of husband who noticed when Sarah was tired and took over her chores without being asked. The kind of father who got down on the floor to play with his children, who taught them to ride and read with equal patience. The kind of man who still, after years of marriage, asked, "May I help you with that?" instead of assuming she needed help or barging in to take over. Sarah's ranch in Arkansas, the one she had defended so fiercely, became a distant memory. This Missouri ranch, built with Isaac's hands and her determination, was home in a way that small Arkansas property had never been. Not because it was bigger or more prosperous, but because she had chosen it freely, had built it as an equal partner, and had never once felt that accepting help cost her freedom. Thomas Brennan had written her once, a stiff letter inquiring if she had come to her senses and regretted her rash decision. Sarah had written back a single line, "I have come to my joy. I regret nothing." She never heard from him again. On a spring evening in 1890, Sarah and Isaac sat on their porch watching their 5 children play in the yard. Thomas was 12 now, already showing signs of his father's height. Mary was 10, serious and thoughtful. John was 7, wild as a March wind. The twins, Anna and Grace, were 5 and identical except for the gap in Grace's front teeth. "You ever miss it?" Isaac asked. "The quiet of running a place by yourself," Sarah laughed. "Not even a little bit. Do you ever regret not taking that foreman position all those years ago?" "I took a foreman position. I just also got you in the bargain. Some might say you got the worst end of that deal." Isaac took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that years of work had built. "Some might say a lot of things, but I know the truth. That day in the general store, when I asked if I could help you carry that feed, I had no idea you would end up carrying me through this life. That your strength would become mine. That your fierce independence would teach me what true partnership looks like." "I think we carry each other," Sarah said softly. "That is what makes it work." "May I help you carry that?" Isaac asked, smiling. "Still the best question I ever asked." "Yes," Sarah said, as she had said that day in the store, but with 14 years of certainty behind it now. "Yes, you may." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the Missouri sky in shades of gold and rose. In the yard, their children played and laughed, secure in the love that had built this life. Sarah thought about the woman she had been in Bentonville, the widow who refused every suitor, who held the world at arm's length, who believed that accepting help meant losing herself. She thought about Isaac, quietly offering to carry her burden without demanding anything in return. She thought about the moment she had realized that true love did not diminish her strength but multiplied it, that the right partner did not complete her because she had never been incomplete, but complemented her, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. The ranch bell rang, calling the children to dinner. They came thundering toward the house, a mass of noise and energy and growing limbs. Mary reached the porch first, being the fastest, with Thomas close behind trying to maintain his dignity as the eldest. John came next, already talking about something he had seen down by the creek. The twins brought up the rear, holding hands as they usually did, finishing each other's sentences in that way that still amazed Sarah. Inside, the dinner table was set for 7. Sarah had made roast chicken with vegetables from their garden, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. It was simple food, the kind she had been making for years, but it tasted like home and happiness, and everything she had never known she wanted until Isaac had asked that quiet question. As they ate, the children competed for attention, telling stories about their day. Thomas had helped his father with the new fence line. Mary had found a nest of baby rabbits and made everyone promise not to disturb it. John had caught 3 fish in the creek. Anna and Grace had made mud pies, which explained the state of their dresses. Isaac listened to each child with full attention, asking questions, offering praise, occasionally correcting behavior with gentle firmness. Sarah watched him and felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that rainy afternoon on her Arkansas porch when he had told her about his mother. After dinner, Isaac helped clean up while the children did their evening chores. This was their routine, the comfortable rhythm they had built over years of partnership. Sarah washed dishes while Isaac dried, their movements synchronized from long practice. "Thomas asked me today about the ranch," Isaac said, "about whether it would be his someday. What did you tell him?" "That it would belong to all of them equally. That we built this place for our family, not for one child." Sarah nodded. This had always been their understanding. They were building a legacy, yes, but not one that required their children to compete or sacrifice for it. "Do you think they will want it when they are grown?" "Some will, some will not. Thomas has the temperament for it. Mary might surprise us and run the whole operation. John will probably head west looking for adventure." Isaac smiled. "The twins are too young to tell, but I suspect they will do something unexpected." "As long as they are happy," Sarah said. "That is all I want for them, the freedom to choose their own paths, like their mother chose hers." Sarah dried her hands and turned to face Isaac. "I chose you. Best decision I ever made." He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. 14 years of marriage, 5 children, and countless challenges overcome together, yet moments like this still felt precious and new. "I love you," Isaac murmured against her hair. "I love you too." They stood together in their kitchen, the sounds of their children settling down for the evening drifting through the house. Outside, the Missouri night fell softly over their ranch, over the land they had claimed and tamed and made productive through sheer determination and partnership. Sarah thought about the girl she had been at 16, orphaned and lost. About the young woman at 24, widowed and determined never to be vulnerable again. About the woman at 26, standing in a general store in Arkansas, convinced she could carry every burden alone. That woman would barely recognize her life now. That woman had been so focused on independence that she had almost missed the difference between being controlled and being partnered, between losing yourself and finding something greater. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew tall and serious, learning the ranch business with the same quiet competence his father showed. Mary developed a gift for working with horses, able to gentle the wildest colt with patience and intuition. John did indeed strike out west when he turned 18, sending letters from California that spoke of gold and adventure. The twins grew into beautiful, intelligent young women who shocked everyone by deciding to become teachers, moving to St. Louis to attend normal school. Through it all, the ranch prospered. Isaac's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew, and their cattle brought top prices at market. Sarah's garden expanded into a full vegetable operation, supplying several nearby towns. They hired hands to help with the work, and Sarah made sure they were paid fairly and treated with respect, remembering how Isaac had started as a ranch hand himself. In 1895, Thomas married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sensible young woman named Catherine who loved ranching as much as he did. They moved into a house Isaac and his son built together on the far edge of the property, starting their own family while remaining part of the larger ranch operation. Mary married at 23 to a horse trader who understood her passion for the animals. They settled nearby, running a breeding operation that complemented the cattle ranch perfectly. John eventually returned from California with a wife and stories of the Pacific Ocean, deciding that home was not such a bad place after all. The twins both married fellow teachers and stayed in St. Louis, visiting several times a year with their growing families. Sarah and Isaac made the trip to the city occasionally, marveling at the buildings and crowds but always happy to return to their ranch, to the wide open spaces and honest work. In 1900, Sarah turned 50 and Isaac turned 52. They were grandparents many times over, their house often full of children's children during holidays and summer visits. Sarah's hair had gone gray, and Isaac's face was deeply lined from years in the sun. But they were both healthy and strong, still working the ranch, still building the life they had started together. It was a warm June evening when Sarah found Isaac standing by the fence line, looking out over their land. She walked up beside him, taking his hand as naturally as breathing. "Thinking profound thoughts?" she asked. "Thinking about the first fence I repaired for you," Isaac said. "Back in Arkansas, all those years ago. I was so nervous that day, worried you would refuse my help like you had refused everyone else. I almost did. If you had asked differently, I would have. What made the difference?" Sarah considered this, though she had thought about it many times over the years. "You made it about me, not about you. You asked if I needed help, not if you could help me. It seems like a small distinction, but it made all the difference. You gave me agency in the interaction instead of assuming you knew what I needed. My mother would have liked you," Isaac said quietly. "She would have approved of how you insisted on keeping your strength even as you accepted help. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved seeing this." Isaac gestured at their ranch, at the house with lights glowing in the windows, at the barns and corrals and the distant shapes of cattle grazing. "She died believing that accepting help always cost too much. I think it would have given her peace to see that it does not have to be that way." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We made something good here. We made something extraordinary." They stood together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same way they had stood on Sarah's porch in Arkansas 15 years earlier. The same comfortable silence, the same sense of partnership, but deepened and enriched by years of shared life. "May I help you carry that?" Isaac said suddenly, and Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Carry what?" "Whatever you are carrying. Whatever burdens you hold. Whatever dreams you still have. May I help you carry them for as long as we have left?" Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. After all these years, after 5 children and a successful ranch and more happiness than she had ever imagined possible, Isaac was still asking permission, still offering partnership instead of demanding it. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, you may." "And may I help you carry yours?" "Always," Isaac said. "That is how we do this, how we have always done this." They walked back to the house together, still holding hands, still partners after all these years. Inside, they could hear Thomas and Catherine, who had come for dinner with their 3 children. Laughter echoed from the house, the sound of family, of love, of a life built on the foundation of a quiet question asked in a general store in Arkansas. That night, lying in bed with Isaac's arms around her, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From orphaned girl to practical wife to determined widow to this. A woman deeply loved, a partner in a true marriage, a mother and grandmother, a successful rancher, a person who had learned that accepting help did not mean losing yourself but finding yourself more fully. Isaac. She whispered into the darkness. Yes, thank you. For what? For asking. For always asking instead of assuming. For seeing me as I was and loving me anyway. For showing me that the right kind of love makes you stronger, not weaker. Isaac's arms tightened around her. Thank you for saying yes. For trusting me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. For building this life with me. For showing me what it means to truly partner with someone. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other and in the life they had created together. 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and had chosen, every day since, to keep finding each other. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that time brings. Isaac's hair went white, and his joints began to stiffen with age. Sarah developed a tremor in her hands that made fine work difficult. They slowed down, passing more of the ranch operation to Thomas and his family while remaining involved in the decisions and daily life. Their children brought them 18 grandchildren in total, a rowdy collection of personalities and talents that kept Sarah and Isaac busy and entertained. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, expanding onto additional land and becoming one of the most respected operations in the region. In 1908, Sarah and Isaac celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party their children organized. All 5 of their children came home, bringing spouses and children, filling the house and yard with noise and life. There was music and dancing and more food than could possibly be eaten, though everyone tried. Late in the evening, after most of the grandchildren had been put to bed, and the party had quieted to small groups talking and laughing, Thomas stood up and called for attention. "I want to say something," he announced, and the conversations fell silent. "I have been thinking lately about legacy, about what our parents have built here. And yes, they built a successful ranch. They built prosperity and security for all of us, but that is not the real legacy." He looked at Sarah and Isaac, his eyes suspiciously bright. "The real legacy is how they built it, together, as equal partners. My father has never made a major decision about this ranch without consulting my mother. My mother has never felt she had to choose between being strong and being loved. They showed all of us what a real marriage looks like, what true partnership means." Mary stood up then. "They showed us that asking for help is not weakness, that offering help should not come with strings, that the right person will make you more yourself, not less." John raised his glass. "They showed us that home is not a place, but the people you choose to build a life with." The twins stood together, as they usually did. "They showed us that love is not about grand gestures, but about showing up every day, about choosing each other over and over, about carrying each other's burdens and celebrating each other's joys." Sarah was crying now, not bothering to hide it. Isaac's hand found hers under the table, his grip still strong despite his years. "To Mom and Dad," Thomas said, raising his glass high. "To 30 years of marriage and a lifetime of showing us how it should be done." "To Mom and Dad," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Later, after the guests had finally gone to bed or headed home, Sarah and Isaac sat on their porch watching the stars. It was a clear night, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky in a river of light. 30 years, Sarah said wonderingly. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I would do it all again, Isaac said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time. Even when I was stubborn and difficult, especially then. Your strength is what I fell in love with first. Your refusal to be diminished. Your determination to live life on your own terms. I never wanted to change that. I just wanted to be beside you while you did it. Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life with a simple question in a general store. His face was weathered with age, his body marked by years of hard work, but his eyes were still creek water clear, still full of the same quiet kindness that had first caught her attention. "May I help you carry that?" she asked, throwing his own words back at him. Isaac smiled. "May I help you carry this? This growing old together, this next phase of life, this letting go as our children take over the ranch, this whatever comes next, you may," Sarah said, "on one condition." "What is that?" "That you let me help you carry it too. We do this together, like we have done everything else." "Together," Isaac agreed. "Always together." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts joined, two people who had found each other when they needed it most and had built a life beyond anything either had imagined possible. The ranch spread out around them in the darkness, full of their history and their children's futures, a testament to what could be built when the right people found each other at the right time. In 1912, Isaac began to slow down more noticeably. The doctor said it was his heart, that years of hard work had taken their toll. He could no longer ride all day or do heavy labor, and Sarah watched with a mixture of frustration and tenderness as her eternally capable husband had to accept his own limitations. But even in this, they partnered. Sarah took over tasks that Isaac could no longer manage, and he focused his energy on the planning and decision-making aspects of the ranch. They adjusted, as they had always adjusted, finding new rhythms and new ways to support each other. On a cold February morning in 1913, Isaac did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, Sarah's hand in his last words the night before being "I love you." He was 65 years old and had lived to see his children grown and successful, his grandchildren thriving, and his ranch prospering under his son's capable management. Sarah was 63 and suddenly alone in a way she had not been for 35 years. The grief was immense, a physical pain that seemed to hollow her out from the inside. But even in her grief, she recognized the enormous gift she had been given. 35 years of true partnership, of deep love, of daily choosing and being chosen. She did not fall apart as she had after Thomas died. She grieved, deeply and truly, but she did not lose herself in the grief. Isaac had taught her too well that accepting help did not mean weakness, and she allowed her children to support her, to care for her, to carry her through the darkest days. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Missouri. Cowboys Isaac had worked with, ranchers he had helped, townspeople who had known him as a fair and honest man. Story after story emerged of Isaac quietly helping people, asking, "May I help you carry that?" in various ways throughout his life. Sarah stood at his grave and thought about the man who had asked if he could help her carry a feed sack in a general store in Arkansas. The man who had loved her fierce independence even as he offered partnership. The man who had built a life with her based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The man who had shown her that the right kind of love made you stronger, not weaker. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for showing me what we could build together." The years after Isaac's death were quieter but not empty. Sarah remained on the ranch, still involved in its operation though at a reduced capacity. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them about the ranch's history, about their grandfather's quiet strength and steady love. She wrote letters to John in California and the twins in St. Louis, keeping the family connected across the miles. In 1918, Sarah turned 68 and decided it was time to write down her story. Not for publication, but for her children and grandchildren, so they would know how their family had truly begun. She wrote about the widow who refused every suitor, about the quiet cowboy who simply asked if he could help, about building a life and a ranch through partnership and love. She wrote about learning that independence and love were not opposites but complementary forces, that the right person would never diminish your strength, but would give you someone to share your burdens with. She wrote about choosing and being chosen, about daily acts of love being more important than grand gestures, about building something extraordinary from simple materials. Respect, affection, hard work, and unwavering commitment. When she finished, she gathered her children together and gave each family a copy. "This is who we are," she told them. "This is where we came from, not just a successful ranch, but a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. That is the real legacy your father and I want to leave you." Sarah lived to be 73, passing peacefully in her sleep in the house she and Isaac had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Her last coherent words were about Isaac, about how she would see him soon, about how she had one more burden she needed his help carrying. She was buried next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read, "Sarah Foster. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She knew when to accept help and when to offer it. Next to her husband's stone that read, "Isaac Foster," he asked, and then listened to the answer. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through Thomas's line primarily, though all of Sarah and Isaac's children remained involved in various ways. The story of how it all started, with a quiet question in a general store, became family legend, told and retold to new generations. But more than the story, what persisted was the model Sarah and Isaac had provided. That true partnership meant respecting each other's strength while supporting each other's weaknesses. That asking for help was not weakness but wisdom. That offering help should never come with strings attached, and that the right kind of love made both people more fully themselves. In the end, that was the real legacy of the widow who refused every suitor until a quiet cowboy simply asked, "May I help you carry that?" Not the successful ranch or the prosperous family or even the enduring love story, though all of those mattered. The real legacy was the understanding that being strong did not mean being alone, that accepting help did not mean losing yourself, and that the right person would see your independence not as a challenge to overcome, but as a gift to honor and protect. And for Sarah and Isaac, that understanding had made all the difference. From a chance encounter in a general store to building a life that spanned decades and touched generations, they had shown that sometimes the quietest questions have the most profound answers, and that true love is not about completing each other, but about choosing to carry each other's burdens together, for as long as you both shall live. Their grandchildren's grandchildren still tell the story, still remember the lesson. That love should make you stronger, that partnership means respecting autonomy while offering support, and that sometimes the most important question you can ask is the simplest one. May I help you carry that? 5 words that changed everything. 5 words that built a legacy. 5 words that proved that the right kind of help offered in the right way can open doors that seemed permanently closed. And in the end, is that not what love should be? Not a demand or an expectation or a price to be paid, but an offer freely given and freely accepted. A choice to walk together through life's challenges and joys. 2 strong people becoming even stronger by choosing to share their strength with each other. Sarah and Isaac understood that. They lived it every day of their 35 years together. And in doing so, they built something far more valuable than a successful ranch or a prosperous family. They built a model of what love could be when stripped of power dynamics and expectations, when based instead on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They built a life where asking for help and offering help were both seen as expressions of love rather than admissions of weakness or demands for control. That was their gift to each other and to the generations that followed. That was the real story behind the widow who refused every suitor until a quiet cowboy simply asked, "May I help you carry that?" It was never really about the refusal or the acceptance. It was about finding someone who asked the right question in the right way, who saw strength as something to honor rather than something to overcome, who understood that true partnership means carrying each other's burdens while respecting each other's ability to carry their own. And for Sarah, standing in that general store in Bentonville, Arkansas in October of 1876, hearing those 5 simple words from a man she barely knew, it had been the beginning of everything, of love, of partnership, of a life richer and fuller than anything she had imagined possible when she was determined to face the world alone. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simplest steps. Sometimes the most profound changes start with the quietest questions. And sometimes, when you have spent years learning to carry everything yourself, the greatest act of courage is simply saying yes when someone asks if they can help you carry that burden, just for a little while, just to see what it feels like to walk together instead of alone. For Sarah and Isaac, that one moment of courage, that one quiet question and its even quieter answer, had been enough to build a lifetime on. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?